In an earlier video, I talked about the importance in Britain of having a shared identity and a shared culture, a shared set of values to which everyone subscribes and everyone agrees, and that how that should be the basis for what it means to be British. In this video, I want to go a bit deeper into that, especially with respect to my personal experience of growing up in Britain and how I grew up feeling very much a part of the country. I grew up feeling like Britain is my country and that British culture is my culture, even though I'm an ethnic minority. And how it meant that the way I relate to white English people is, I think, quite differently to how a lot of minorities today seem to relate, at least a lot of minorities who are prominent in the public sphere. So I grew up in Yorkshire, and when I was growing up there, at least, it was predominantly white. And the only sort of minorities, the main minorities were South Asians, really, and most of whom were Pakistani or Bangladeshi and Muslim, whereas I'm from Indian background and I'm from a different religion. So I didn't really have a strong connection to the major sort of South Asian communities there. And even at school, most of my friends were white. Actually, all my friends are white except one guy. I remember now. And to be honest, my school mostly just had white kids, and I felt quite comfortable with that. I made some really good friends, and I think that I was essentially British in my kind of character, in my mannerisms, in my sort of politeness, in the sort of things I wanted. Of course, having an Indian background and Indian parents meant there was that whole other influence there as well. But in terms of being British and being able to live and thrive in British society, I felt like I had everything there, all the ingredients. And it wasn't until I went to London that I met minorities of my background who had a completely different view of things. Specifically, a lot of people seemed uncomfortable hanging out with white people, and there were a lot of people who didn't even have any white friends, and all their friends were from the same background as them. So Gujaratis, Punjabis. I found that just fascinating. In some ways, I envied them a little bit because I thought they got to grow up around a lot of other Indians, which meant they could speak their language, they could share in their culture. But on the other hand, after a while, I realized that I had a level of comfort with white British people that they just didn't have, and that they couldn't have because they just hadn't grown up like that. And I felt happy about the fact that I'd had that exposure from a really young age, because it meant that I didn't feel like an alien living there. And I could really get on with white people from any part of Britain, really. I was just very comfortable hanging out with groups of people like that. And most of my friends in college, at least the people I lived with throughout college, actually they were all white, even though my friends in my course were South Asian. It just didn't plan for that. Just sort of the way things turned out. So I got to have exposure to different ethnic groups in college like that. And obviously, I met people from East Asia. I met black people. London's kind of a melting pot of all these different kinds of people, which is really great. But overall, because I'd grown up in a part of the country and in a place where people were predominantly white, I always felt comfortable around white people. And over the years in London, and as we've seen this sort of wokeness take over and the rhetoric being imported from America, this sort of critical race theory, intersectionality rhetoric, I've noticed how people today, I mean, some people demonize white people. They say that it's ethnic minorities kind of hold the country up. There are people who openly say that they don't have any white friends. You know, we're all there, living in the same country, and we all have a shared understanding of the culture, and that's what really matters to me. And I'm really thankful that I have that viewpoint, and it's because I have that viewpoint that I want to articulate a future where we build on those shared values and we maybe specify them in a more explicit manner. And it's a shame that more people just don't feel that way. Of course, when I talk about more people, I'm talking about the people who we see in the media, people who talk prominently about this, because I'm sure there are lots of minorities who are like me, who feel very comfortable living in Britain and who love being surrounded by white British people and white culture. I mean, the culture in Britain, if you really think about it, it's a legacy of people who came before us. People who say that, well, it was minorities who helped build up the country. It's not really true. No, it's a Judeo-Christian country traditionally, and it was white people, Judeo-Christian white people, who helped build a culture, and it's the legacy of that culture which a lot of us were brought up on and continue to be brought up on. And it's all the things that we like about British culture are things from that. Now, I'm not saying that things were perfect in the early 1900s or in the 19th century. I mean, slavery hadn't been finished for that long. Kids were working in factories. Obviously, there was a lot more prejudice against non-white people, even non-English people, to be fair. So I'm not trying to idolize that time in history, but I am trying to say that we owe a lot to the legacy left behind by the people who lived at that time in terms of our cultural inheritance. And I'm okay with that. I don't need to feel that minorities came to Britain and created what it is. No, we came and we added culture to it. We helped to enhance it in many ways, but the core of it comes from that time. And I think that's something that should be recognized more in Britain.